This panel serves as an illustration of the times that we are all living in, the time of growing distrust. The topic changed many times, as did the makeup of the panel, so I am glad to see all of the gentlemen gathered here. To all of you who came here to listen to the two ambassadors of countries' powerhouses who are in the field of security, I need to say that independent of our will, they were not able to be here to give their presentations. Which means that I have the honor to moderate this panel and to speak on their behalf a little bit. The good news is that we are not going to be showing a presentation. We already had some very interesting, colorful presentations. I will be using the spoken word. We will be talking about security, trust, and innovation, and the correlation of the above. We have heard a lot about different data. Statistical figures have been presented. Let me run through some of the most important ones from my point of view that determine that which we will be talking about today. When you look back 13 years ago, that's the year when the first iPhone came out. Let's call it a smartphone. It's a device that all of us have in our pocket. I'm talking about a smartphone. It is actually a computer, or even more. It is a multimedia studio and a discussion partner, although those AI assistants are not always working the way we want them to. I remember 13 years ago when I worked for Orange, and everybody was quite skeptical towards this new technology. It was expensive, it was energy consuming, and the benefits were not that great at that time. It was hard to imagine how this revolution in the mobile industry would impact the world that was coming up. 3.5 billion people is the figure showing how many people use smartphones. Today, Mr. Chihe talked about 51% of people using the internet, but you have to remember that out of those 51%, when you look at the developed and highly developed countries, these figures are higher. 75, 80% of the population use the internet. So we are living in the world that has been fully digitally penetrated, that allows us to achieve highly developed convergence of digital assets. Arthur C. Clarke wrote about these aspects. Those of you who are big on sci-fi literature know about what he wrote on. Highly developed technology, to quote his words, is not distinguishable from magic, but magic brings good and bad sides to it. What kind of bad sides are we talking about? What challenges should be discuss? All risks involved. I'm sure that you're familiar with the concept of darknet. It is a space within the network that encompasses almost 96%. That's the figure quoted by specialists. Let's call it a vast majority of the network that has illegal operations running within them, that run contrary or violate different criminal codes of various countries. Things are going down that are not lawful, from drugs onto software, illicit software, and other aspects that are devices and software that allow us to run illegal operations, including services. You can purchase network-based services, or you can purchase hacking services as well on darknet. It is small wonder, therefore, that at Davos it was talked about when the speakers and the attendees talked about cybersecurity and the threats that are posed. This was the topic number 2, right after ecology. At that time, we didn't have viruses or the coronavirus virus spreading. But this particular ranking gives you an idea of how important cybersecurity is in today's world. When you think of hackers, you see young, rebellious individuals wearing their sweaters who do different weird things in the background. 86% of hackers are employees of well-organized criminal activities, businesses that spend a lot of money on their operations, or maybe I should say invest great funds into their illicit operations. Their investments are 10 times as high as the investments of companies that invest in cybersecurity. So we have a 10-to-1 ratio. It is not promising. Although these aspects are changing dramatically and difficult to grasp, McAfee talks about $600 billion being lost a year. That's about 1% of the worldwide GDP. According to the British data, 10 to 15 internet-based cybersecurity-related incidents are reported, not more. The figure is so small because some companies don't want to report these incidents for image-related issues. They are reluctant to report them. If we were to break those statistics down into the individual companies, we would see that cybersecurity compromises pose great challenges to various companies, although not every company is aware of that. When we talk about 600 billion, that sounds enigmatic. 190 days to discover a threat. When we talk about the 88 or close to 1 billion of losses of a bank in Bangladesh, or when we talk about Equinix, a company that lost 100 records relating to their clients. These are not enigmatic aspects. We are talking about hard data. Over $1 billion have been spent from that time to close all the security gaps. But we're not talking only about money. When you look at the new technology that is coming into e-health or transportation, you see new areas of security that need to be addressed. They have their financial aspects, but they also have their health-related or other risks involved. Imagine that one of the former deputy president of the United States needed to undergo an operation so that his heart ticker could be ridden of a security threat. We are talking about something very tangible. How can we address that issue of cybersecurity? How do we mitigate the problem and eliminate it? There are two diverse approaches to this. The first approach has to do with saying that cybersecurity poses a threat like any other, and the other approach says that cybersecurity issues can be completely eliminated using various methodologies. There are regulations that also address these aspects. Regulations that span some entities. We have the Cybersecurity Act coming into force last year. We are going to be talking about it in this panel and the next one. We have another dimension to consider as well, the dimension of regulations and interstate argumentation. Mr. Cichy already talked about that to some extent. The question is, to what extent that which is happening in the space of military developments in cyberspace has impact on the economy and its growth? To what extent does the digital trust pose a critical factor? And how do policies come into the field in the form of regulations? Let's move on to our panelists so that we can think about how these new technologies, and I am talking about the whole spectrum of them that you're most likely familiar with, including 5G and artificial intelligence and Internet of Things. I don't know if you know that on average a new IoT device has an attack on it performed 5 minutes after it is connected to the grid. But to get back to the topic, how do these new technologies impact our lives? That is the issue that we have to tackle today. Paul Scanlon, the CTO of Huawei, is here with us, so please allow me to switch over to English. From the technological point of view, he is the person who is most savvy to answer and to the question of to what extent can technology defend itself, or to what extent do we need to have something else implemented. Paul works with a company that also takes part in the interstate disputes, or at least is part of the dialogue between different member states. So he will deliver an interesting perspective on the topic.
Okay. Well, so then I would just repeat the question. I think that would be enough because what I said before, it was just maybe less relevant. So about the new technologies, yes, we have these technologies, 5G, artificial IoT, cloud. All these technologies comes with certain risk, which is cybersecurity risk, but not only. But let's focus on that. And the question would be, to which extent this technology may protect itself? To which extent technology is the answer for the question how we should mitigate the risk coming from implementation of the new technologies? And if you could put it on the broader frame of what this technology is, how this technology is changing our world, that would be, I think, very interesting to hear from you as CTO of one of the leaders.
Thank you. It's not an easy question to answer, but let me just give you a bit of a history lesson. If you look at the internet, yes, the internet has been sort of self-regulating for how many years? Yeah, you remember that Bernard Shaw's mentioned that if you regulate it, then do you regulate things or do you innovate? Yes, I mean that's the bottom line. Do you keep regulating things or do you innovate? If you innovate, enable. So let's come down to a couple of key things. And I was just speaking to Lydia just a few minutes ago. The way cybersecurity has been addressed today, unfortunately, is wrong. But the good thing is that it's finally being addressed. So for 50 years, we've never talked about cybersecurity, ever, internationally, between governments, between vendors, between standards bodies. Never, 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 all right? So we've attacked it through Huawei, through China, through 5G. But the difference between 5G and 4G is 1.3 dB, about 34%. Not 20 times, not 100 times, not 10 gigabits per second, about 34%. But what we did in the standards bodies for 5G is that we fixed a few fundamental security deficiencies. So the first thing is 5G is far more secure than 4G. Doesn't matter what you've read. You can check the standards. You don't have to listen to Paul. Right? You can check the standards bodies. You can check every single vendor, every single operator, every single standards group. And what we did is we fixed the ability for third parties to eavesdrop in your conversation. That's what we've done. So that's a good thing, right? That's a good reason why we did those things. As we start to understand different use cases for this thing called 5G, and remember 5G by itself doesn't do everything. But this concept of slicing of networks, which we never had before, means we had to address security. So two fundamental things changed when we were talking about 5G, all right, just for the first part. You just mentioned things like IoT and AI. So let's talk about how these are addressed in industry. There's been discussion held that says 5G, because it's going to connect everything, the threat landscape is much bigger. So the threat landscape may be broader, but I would argue that all those devices are now connected by 5G technology, which is more secure than 4G and more secure than 3G and much more secure than 2G. So in an IoT world that doesn't use 5G, you're starting from a point that is absolutely insecure. So now let's come back down to why things like 5G, IoT, and even AI. I believe, and Huawei believes, that it's a shared responsibility. This is not about a vendor. This is not about a standards group, not about a regulator. This is about having mature discussions to understand the problem. And the example I would give to everybody, it's very simple. There are just two things you need to answer yourself. You just opened your smartphone, sorry, I'll repeat it, and you downloaded an app. You downloaded an app, right? And what did it ask you when you downloaded the free app? Can I steal your data? Correct? In different words, it said, I want to access all your contacts, all your phone, I want everything, right? That's what it said. And you said, yes. Okay, so there's an education problem, first of all. There's no process, there's no standards. And when you come to a Wi-Fi network anywhere in the world, it asks you, can I steal your data again, right? And you say yes, because it's free. So just keep those things in mind. And the reason I want to put it this way is because you have several million applications that are running on smart devices. You mentioned smart devices in your comments, and you made two examples of the Bangladesh cybersecurity, and you mentioned a few of the others, yes? So just come back down to some of the fundamental principles. We need the right regulatory policies, we need the right discussion, but we need the right information. And today everybody talks about cybersecurity like they invented it, or they're the godfather of it, but quite frankly, if it starts with users whose behaviour we cannot, I'll say, educate, and all the people in the supply chain, then we'll never have a proper cyber-based network, a network of security ever, anywhere in the world. So you need all the partners to come together. And I call them partners because any gap in the loophole, it's not about a Microsoft software problem or a Huawei vendor problem or a regulatory problem or a person problem. This is the type of discussion that we need to have. So when Huawei, now let's come down to Huawei, and you're asking about equipment of the future and things like this. When we develop these things, let's start with the principles of a company. The principles of the company state that every employee must study and pass a cybersecurity exam in our company. Every single person. And after you've passed the exam, you sign. So if you do anything wrong in the company, you go to jail, not the company. So we start with some principles, we start with some governance, we start with some process. And above all, where did we start from? We started with education. So we started to teach people what's important, some principles, so that everybody understands privacy, privacy of data, security and network security, what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. And that goes everywhere from the person who is the administrative assistant down to the R&D engineer. So there's an example of what we do in Huawei. And you don't know that, right? Because you all think, oh, somebody hacked this or somebody hacked... No. There are no backdoors in the product. And the reason there's no backdoors in the product is because we're a commercial company. And if we're a commercial company and you do something stupid like that, you will never do business again anywhere in the world. So a lot of fear-mongering, a lot of people talking about concepts of security and cybersecurity without really understanding that this is not one part or one party's problem. This is a globe, this is an epidemic, right? This is a problem as bad as the coronavirus, if I could put it. And together with the third topic, which is really about energy and green, they're probably the three hottest topics on the planet today. So I'm very pleased to say that, Poland here at least is trying to address it by having the discussion across different industry groups. But they're just a couple of comments from Paul.
Okay, thank you very much. It's quite interesting, but you said, if I properly understood that, 5G is much more secure than 4G. and most likely 6G is going to be more secure than 5G, which push us back to the basic question: to which extent technology as such is an answer for our problems, for downsides, which is, well, it's unquestionable. Everyone knows that we do have problems with technology, that there is little chance you can fully mitigate or eliminate this problem.
Sure.
You may work on resilience, but to which extent this technology comes with the answer as well?
Sure. Okay. So let's take, I believe it's a self-regulating ultimately, and the reason I believe that is because let's take examples of, and I don't mean to any disrespect to other companies that have been in the news, but you have information from different, social media organizations, all right? Let's just put it this way, just about every one of them. And that's because a lot of these have come up with an idea from an entrepreneur, a startup, which has suddenly grown into an explosion around the world, okay? There wasn't any regulatory policy because it was not understood what could happen. So what I'm trying to say is that when we talk about technology, the network technology, those things that Huawei's been building, which include data center and AI components and smartphones, some of these things are better regulated from a standards perspective, is what I'll put it. So we see it as an evolution. Yes, as you build it today, you bring all the experts from around the world. It's not one company, it's not one country who's driving these things, they're standards bodies. So we think about it in order for what? To provide a platform, because it's like a utility. But what happens today? Today we have all these social platforms that are completely unregulated. You have APIs that are written and applications that are published by millions of people around the world. They're also platform by nature. But again, they don't follow any of the processes. So the real underlying answer to the question, I believe, is it's not the technology by itself, but what happens when the technology becomes platform-based. Now you don't have one person or a number of people. Now you have half the planet who will drive improvements. Either there'll be public outcry, or there'll be other problems, social problems, or there'll be industry-type problems, as you mentioned before, hacking and things like this. So those things will come around to either force those companies to try to improve those platforms. But as you can see, these things aren't bulletproof. The one that's been bulletproof are the ones that always follow standards-based solutions. And so today, networks, they follow standards-based solutions. IoT has a lot of alliances, and that's why probably data models and cybersecurity or security
it's coming, yeah.
is still in its infancy. They're trying to address it. But when you have alliances or different interest groups, that's where you have a challenge. And if you now go to the third part, which is AI and cloud, they don't have any real standards-based, I'll say, organization. You have groups coming together to try to do the right thing. But again, you're not starting from where I'd say the technology has come in the past. And that's because everything is rapidly growing. You can get processing power today for 10% of the price of 5 years ago. Yeah. And when those sorts of things happen, and now you collect so much data, one of the reasons this virus is perhaps going to come under control is because of access to data, which is shared everywhere. So that's an example of a good use of data compared with, the bad uses of data. But I believe in the end, once you have all of these groups, they'll eventually come together. Governments will start to, force some regulatory framework around them. But the technology itself, I don't think the technology by itself has the ability to fix the problem.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting. And I hope that asking my next guest, we will just continue also discussing that very important element when considering the trust in the digital society. Lydia, my dzisiaj już słyszeliśmy.
Lydia, today we have heard much about regulatory bodies for electronics strategy, what happens in international arena. Paul made it pretty clear, technology as such is not the answer to the question. What we need is a number of elements to instill digital trust. We were speaking about education too. We were talking 5G. So What is your point of view, the regulatory body's perspective? Of course, regulatory body is not responsible for cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is the responsibility of the government and the government's proxy, and we haven't had a government proxy for the number of weeks. Therefore, we can see how very much neglected it has been in Poland. What is your attitude? Because you have started 5G auction, we've heard that 5G brings about greater network security, but this is only a part of the picture. What are the other elements of the puzzle? Who are the main stakeholders?
Directly to Paul, who said that 5G will be much more secure. Even if 5G will be more secure, the simple consequence of 5G will be rapid development of number of internet-enabled devices. According to predictions published last year by Cisco, by 2022, every citizen in Poland will have average 3.9 electronic devices. It will bring a lot of benefits to all citizens, but also it will expose them to many risks. Therefore, capacity building and education and public awareness campaigns will be very important from the perspective of end user. Maybe I don't know which language should I use in a discussion because
the two are possible, English and Polish.
Okay. Yes.
Electronic Supervisory Body of Poland has observed what has happened on the international arena. We can see the developments. The International Telecommunication Association recommends to create cyber security strategies based on the number of pillars. First is the most obvious: technical issues. Centers that are responsible for cybersecurity standard bodies creation. Second, legislation, regulations, which respond to market development and counteract cybersecurity. Capacity building and public awareness is also very important, but this is not limited to public awareness development, but it also informs about trainings and training sessions in lifelong learning system for professionals too, for those who are into this business sector. And something that Paul was speaking about, multi-stakeholder approach, the need for cooperation between different business sectors and industries. Therefore, public sector, private sector, public administration are able to exchange their experiences and bring forces together. Not only will they be able to counteract cybercrime, but also react swiftly to what has happened. Can we possibly say where we are now? You have demonstrated the ITU report. Yes, and according to this ranking, we are somewhere in the middle of the ranking. Not bad, I would say. Not necessarily is this reflected in other national surveys. Kantar Research Group has only recently published the survey. There was a number of questions designed to examine SME sector's response to cyber threats. To cut the long story short, they do not react according to the rankings results. 75 to 80% of the companies do not have any money earmarked for cybersecurity. They might use standardized solutions like clouds. So this is one of very interesting elements because in our culture, we are not that willing to switch to cloud. Poland is ranked second at the bottom when it comes to cloud-based solution adoption. But this is the cloud that gives you a quantum leap to increase standards and safety and security standards. It brings about lots of solutions. Where are we on this path? 2 years ago, Cybersecurity Act was accepted. I know this is not your cup of tea, but I'm not going to labor the point. But you see operators' reactions, what challenges they face in the market. You were speaking about education, you were speaking about standards, you were speaking about capacity building. Where are we now? What is your perspective? Global Security Index. Well, you may assume an optimistic or pessimistic perspective. A glass is half empty or half full. In a global perspective, we are 27th in the ranking, which seems not bad, taking into consideration the total number of the states, 193. In Europe, we are number 17, so second half of the ranking. So you can interpret the data the way you like, positive or negative. However, there is a great room for improvement. Referring to the examination you mentioned, I've seen PwC's very interesting examination. Only 10% of consumers believe that companies are well prepared to protect their data. On top of that, almost 70% of respondents believe that companies are not ready. 1 in 2 respondents believe they would like to change services providers should they have any doubts with regards to data security. Therefore, people's trust towards companies' readiness is not top level, and this trust towards public administration is even lower. Yes. It's been a lesson for us, GDPR lesson for us. I hate GDPR. I hate using this word because much has been written about this. I don't want to labor the point, but this was kind of educational experience. The first fine administered by the responsible body it was in reference to a cyber attack. That was the Morele company. They were not ready for the attack. The proceedings continue. Time will tell what will be the solution. Roman, you represent IT business. Attende Group used to work in some other very important companies that have developed the ICT business sector in Poland. Your perspective, the perspective of your company that is competent enough to have its say about cybersecurity. Has the market already developed? Is there a demand for this kind of products? May, or are the companies willing to invest? Do we have enough incentives to stimulate this development? Or is this not the top priority? We are talking about trust. We are talking about trust that translates into products. If we break this trust rule once towards the product or service, a product is lost. In day-to-day practice, do you see companies' concentration on this element? It is not a cost, but the price you need to pay to generate new income so that new technology-based products are introduced into the market and includes very good incentive for the client. Hello and welcome. I've never delved into statistics, so what I'm going to say is based on my intuition as I see the problem. New technologies, 5G, are they safer because they have been designed in a better way compared to previous one. There is one nuance. New technologies work faster. Everything happens much faster. And although we try new technologies to be safer, the use of technologies is different. It leaves you no time to react. You need to assume a different attitude. Safety and security must be on board, must be an inbuilt element of a device. You cannot do it as you used to do in the past. How did we do it in the past? And this is the answer to your question. You can't do it the old way. The mentality has been changing. A big company builds a kind of infrastructure, servers, networks. Once they have built this, they say, "Ooh, we need to provide safety and security measures." They open a tender. They scratch their hands. Imagine you do it now. Before they open a tender, they go down the drains. End of story. There is an anecdote I can share. I've just recollected the anecdote. There was a big company, but the tender, they didn't put safety and security element into the tender, and they were unable to buy the product. But, should we tell them that there is this kind of blunder, there's something missing? Oh, we'll do it in the next phase. So how about operational costs? You've got some margin, like 10,000 a month. Oh, it's pretty much. I'm not saying that it's happening now, but this is a real example that happened 2 or 3 years ago. It was millions of zlotys investment, and 10,000 Polish zlotys, they seemed too much. But there was no right attitude in place. I was speaking on one of the conferences before. I was speaking about IT security. It was already on everybody's lips. So I posed a question to the audience. Do you remember any tender? Do you remember any order more than 10,000 zlotys for the next firewall, but some kind of substantial money? There was no hands in the air, so it was on everybody's lips, but nobody walked the talk. It's now over. Some companies have generated great losses because of lack of security. This technology is getting faster and faster, so you cannot do it the old ways, like you build infrastructure and then you think how to protect it. It needs to be protected up front. It needs to be included in the budget. If we speak about appliances, if these are appliances, security, safety measures must be on board, must be inbuilt. You don't need a separate budget because it's already on board. So if you're serious about it, you need to assume this kind of perspective. There'll be market demand. And the market will be more interesting, profitability-wise, if you're able to deliver these kind of groundbreaking security systems compared to regular infrastructure that everybody can deliver. It's not that easy to provide this kind of security. It's much more difficult than to deliver just a number of servers and network devices to connect them so that they work on their own. In the past, you had to fine-tune everything. Now you've got AI inside that is responsible for fine-tuning. Safety and security, well, it's up to us. In the future, we'll have AI that will decide whether it is safe or not. Now we test artificial intelligence elements, but the market will be expanding. It must be expanding. Otherwise, we won't be able to enter the new era of fast changes, to have more efficient, faster devices.
Ja myślę, że tak.
I attended a different panel today on telecos. I really wanted to see it as we talked about consolidation. And I thought to myself, we are going to learn something new, but apparently everybody's satisfied. Consolidation sometimes happens, sometimes it doesn't, but everything is okay. I believe that we are somehow distorting reality. I don't see any dramatic changes taking place. Whenever I see a C-level manager, I always ask, how is your cybersecurity budget? And he says, well, if things go well, we're going to have the budget. If not, we won't. But it should be the other way around. First, we should have the budget, and then we can say that things are okay. I don't see that paradigm shift happening. That way of thinking is not taking place. I always show how much, and people always show how much companies lose. Think back about Yahoo and how much it was worth when it was acquired. The price changed by $500 million because some things were revealed or 2 attacks had been performed and never reached daylight. And then that information came out, changing the price. Now let's think back about the bank in Bangladesh. Another interesting case. Let me let you in on an anecdote. Over at that bank, they knew that they had cybersecurity problems, so they ran a project. They had a budget in place. Then they decided to postpone spending that budget by a year. And at that time, the break-in happened. It could have been worth $1 billion, but it actually cost them $800 million only, so to say. The difference was stemming from human activity. So I'm not saying that we should hire more humans to safeguard measures, but I'm just saying this as an example. I'd like to turn it over to Michał. He has worked with the same company for 20 years for a corporation, which is a sign of stability, and a good corporation at that. You've been over at Microsoft for 25 years, so you've seen a lot of history of the Polish IT sector, just as I have. So you can tell us how this approach changed. You're still an active member or an active or EPID, one of the chambers that have co-organized this conference. At some time, we decided to track government spending or government tendering procedures. I have not seen a lot of change in the way cybersecurity is appreciated happening. We need to see more cyber trust. It's not enough yet, because trust is part of the product, part of the technology that we're selling. And this level of trust will have impact on how people perceive the product. It will have a competitive edge or value in that. Cybersecurity has sometimes little to do with physical security, and cybersecurity is not talked about often enough, and people think of cybersecurity as if it was physical security. It's not the same thing. How does that look from your viewpoint, representing Microsoft, one of the biggest companies in the world in the field of cybersecurity? Trust is embedded in what you sell, isn't it? It's part of the product. If you run out of trust, you run out of products, don't you? Remember what the NSA said about Windows 10s? I'm talking about a problem that cannot be resolved only through the viewpoint of technology. What is your take on this? Thank you for introducing me as the dinosaur in the IT field. It's like I had a sign on my back saying that. Let me start off by touching on what we just heard from other panelists. Remember the anecdote about Bonaparte? When an officer was announced for promotion, people said that he had gone through a lot of training and that he was highly competent. He had a very good voice, and the Kaiser asked him, but is he lucky, or asked the people, is he lucky enough to be promoted? I think that we are still at the same stage of Napoleon's approach to cybersecurity. The basic question that we are still asking is, are we lucky enough not to be subject of attack? We talked about the law, we talked about the technicalities, we heard a lot about the regulation requirements. All of the above-mentioned components are bearing on security. We are now seeing new technology coming in with the security measures embedded. But I have to say that the real challenge lies within organizations. Organizations cannot fall back on luck and shouldn't. We need to change from looking at individual incidents into changing at rules and tendencies. I think that we have reached that point when it comes to cybersecurity and the cloud. You already said that Poland is still outside of the cloudification zone. But please bear in mind that when we talk about cybersecurity, we need to mention two things. First of all, cybersecurity is global in its nature. And number two, we are talking about professionals performing the attacks. If you nod your head, you often tend to say, but we have a great team if you represent a company. We have a great team, we have the best people on security, so we can weather any storm. The Enigma code was cracked by Poles, so we are highly qualified to have the right security measures in place. But that was way back. We have to look at the world of today. When we look at cybersecurity, we have to also include looking at the cloud and the vendors that work in the cloud. We have to define what lies on our side and what rests with the external world. We also have to know how to manage these aspects. That's the organizational layer. And over on top of that, we have the layer of capacity building, raising of awareness, educating. But the truth is that we are adding security on top of the threats that are happening. We have cyber threats, and we have to address those cyber threats by preparing the organization. It is no easy task for various reasons. It requires many people cooperating, people and parties who speak different languages. You need to bring together lawyers, technicians, and the business side. You need to bring them to the same table. If you hear that the people responsible for the budget say that we have the budget because the decision was made to do so, that's not enough to talk about cybersecurity. We have to look at the fundamentals. All Polish companies have to do that, from small to medium-sized to large-sized corporations, because some of them think that things are going right until they find out that the news has it that such companies like Morele.net was subject to attack, until you hear that bank tellers are sending data outside of the walls of the bank. And there are many examples of security being compromised. It all builds a picture. We talk a lot about trust. You have to look at these aspects not through the lens of the company's name, Microsoft or Huawei. You have to look at it through the lens of people trusting the company. It is now the time of the service. If it generates enough trust, if the service is not trustworthy, the company that delivers the service is going to go out of existence. You have to understand that. And here I'd like to mention the following. First of all, transparency of what we do is key. And second of all, accountability is also instrumental. We need to be transparent and we need to be able to demonstrate our transparency. How do we do that? We have to be able to show that we know how to process data in the most secure of ways. If we can't, we're out of business. This goes for small vendors and big companies. Let me give you an example from a different domain that you can transfer over to our discussion today. Think back what happened to Volkswagen and the CO2 emissions scheme. Did that mean that the vehicles were breaking down more often or that they were faulty? No, it had to do with the trust of the consumer. Because the consumer started thinking, since the managers lied to me once, they're going to lie to me again. So it had little to do with the image of the company as is. It had more to do with the trust to what the company is delivering. To sum up, please bear in mind that what happens at the organizational side of a business is of instrumental importance. If you do not overcome these vital aspects, you're not going to expand and stay in business. That's take-home message number one. And message number two is that you always have to approach any given company through the lens of how much trust can you give it. Remember that transparency and accountability are of key importance. Thank you for that. We still have 15 minutes, so I'd like to ask our panelists to give us a brief recommendation. What could we do here in this country to take the next step forward? As if we were running a medley relay, what would be the next step? You represent an interesting spectrum of different companies that you work with. So it would do well to see what your take-home or what your take on this is. And Michał, speaking to what you said regarding trust, remember what happened at Davos regarding climate change? Each and every one of us present there had to feel that the climate was changing in order to understand and visualize the problem and to take it seriously. Because not everybody is taking it seriously still. When it comes to cybersecurity, we're not even there yet. Not everybody is convinced when they hear that trust is instrumental for their product development. If you want to stay competitive on the Polish and the global scene, you have to remember everything that we said. To close, trust that I talked about has not only to do with cybersecurity, it has to do with artificial intelligence and any aspect of cooperation between the vendor and the buyer. Right on, that's a different topic to a different discussion. So,
to evaluate, if you just advise us what we can do here in Poland, just in order to make our cyberspace more safe, and what that would be from your position as a person that knows technology very, very well and on the global level as well. What should be priorities?
So I think I'd like to pick up on everybody here because I think everybody's picked up on exactly the right components. I like your idea of let's have a medley about cybersecurity. Sorry, I'm losing my voice a little bit. But how about we don't talk about statistics? I agree with you. How about we just talk about facts? All right? So let's start with facts. So let's inform everybody about the truth. So let's start talking about the truth. Because without the truth, everything else doesn't matter, okay? And what is trust? Trust is doing what you said you would do. Yep. You want to put a number on how much are people putting on cybersecurity in a company? $2 billion US. That's what we put. bigger than pretty much every other company, right? Or other than a few of the big ones, right? Just to give you an example, so you want to have a race, let's start with the right rules. The rules, everybody has to understand the rules, and everything should be based on fact. So just now I'd just like to pick up on a little bit more because I do want to harp on 5G, 4G, 3G and 2G. Get rid of the 2 and 3G because there's no security there, negligible. All right? We haven't addressed yet about the green, but if you continue building 4G networks and anything prior to that, you double the carbon footprint. And that's just as important as cybersecurity, okay? So you have good reasons why. Now, if we're going to have 3.9 or 10 or 20, or it doesn't matter how many devices, and we're going to have a lot, and everything, you know, your shoes, your watch, everything's going to be connected. My tie's going to be connected. Everything's going to be connected. The reason it's so important to understand this thing about 5G and the way security was developed for 5G is to understand that whether you've got 2 devices or 10,000 devices, things connected, they're secured down to the connection point. Sure. But we haven't yet defined all those user bits, right? All the applications and other things. So we need some policies around there to fix that, because it doesn't matter whether you deploy this 5 or 6 or whatever G you want to call it and all the great AI things out there, if the consumers or the industry players who are using those applications and or services or products at the end are completely in cowboy land, right? Because nothing's going to happen. Doesn't matter how good all this is. One point you did mention about AI, which is absolutely on the nail, is that AI has the potential through its learning, because what AI does is it looks at everything according to algorithms, and then it looks at different behaviors and it figures out what's right and what's normal and what's not normal, if you want to think of it in a simple way, this training algorithm. So you have the opportunity for AI to identify a lot of the threat. Yeah, you can apply it to any industry, and that's what we use AI for quite extensively. So my suggestion is, number 1, let's talk about facts. Number 2, let's understand from those facts and educate everybody about the truths, and that also extends to how important is privacy and security to people and all the components. And then let's provide the right sort of guidance and ideas all the way down to the consumers, and including all the APIs and all the vendors who are providing all the applications for free, in understanding that it's not right for you to even ask the question of, can I steal your data, in whichever way you want to write it on your thing, because that will fix an enormous amount of problems, all right? When people understand that, you know, if Wi-Fi still has to have passwords, by default it'll never be secure, because people will never want to put a password in, or use a default password, or they don't care. So we've got to get rid of all of these things that occur because of what's happened, as you mentioned, in the past. Let's put away the past because it requires new thinking. And I'd encourage you to do that, because I think Poland can do it.
Thank you very much. It's, you know, I could expect that from CTO that's well structured, clear, crystal clear, I would say. And I would say I would fully agree with that. It's just the simple way, it's not the easiest way sometimes. Lydia, fakty, edukacja, klarowność.
Facts, education, clear instructions to all the stakeholders on how they should act. That's exactly what you're talking about, isn't it? Yes, that is very important. But we are part of the European Union. We've been using the recommendations of the International Telecommunications Union. So I wouldn't worry that much about standards. I wouldn't worry when it comes to big corporations, especially those with international backgrounds, because they can weather the storm quite well.
What a specific phenomenon of Polish economy is a great number of SMEs. In digital economy, data processing is, including those classified ones, is not the domain of big companies. Therefore, SMEs require double the effort in order to protect themselves so that they know what to do, no matter what kind of services they provide, be it B2B or B2C services. So this is something to work on. And cooperation is just similar. Polish cybersecurity strategy reflects what happens on the global or European Commission level, like technical, legal standards, cooperation and knowledge dissemination. Everything has been included. But here in Poland, knowledge dissemination and sector to sector, administration to public sector, private sector, knowledge exchange, which includes SMEs, is also the area that needs to be taken care of, and we need to work out models. This is a hugely interesting topic when you focus on SMEs. Because there's a saying that good intentions do not lead to good results. Which may make them be involved in reporting all day long, rather than protecting and securing. Roman, you said that services can be provided. We've seen it's already in place. But what is important for you and for the companies you represent? What should change so that you can say there's been a quantum leap? I feel awkward because my message was over-optimistic. But this is the time when everybody's suffering from coronavirus. Everybody feels down in the dumps because of the situation now. But referring to what you ask, I hope it will be okay. We've got a great number of companies. We've got lots of our own products which seem to be okay. We need to find products of our partners, global companies that provide products and services. If we want to make a living on selling security, we wouldn't go far. I hope the market will be thriving. But at the moment, the market is quite lazy. People have already started to realize it, but this has been a slow process. This is just a digression. Now, what's my perception of changes? I agree with the four speakers. We need to have a clear policy in place. We need to know what to do. Some countries, and I believe that the European Union will do that as a whole, we need to think about critical areas for cybersecurity. Who can be a provider? Insourcing might be the only answer. Polish companies or companies that are certified by our allies. We need to call a spade a spade. That's the way we do it here. We take the best of the best. And then we have a regular market competition. Otherwise, we don't know which direction to assume. The ordering party does not really know what they could prosper for, and they put the decision on hold. And this is the worst possible scenario, because what we need in business is continuity. What we expect is clear cybersecurity policy in Poland. It will be in place one day. Some things should be certified. We should have European standards. Only recently, ICT Institute has created yet another laboratory. I understand that there won't be many labs of this kind, so I don't know how they are going to run the test. Yeah, it's a sign of time. This is the first lab of this time, first for many years. It's good that something's happening. There needs to be a way to certify that something has done properly, and it needs to be credible and trustworthy. We need it desperately. It might be dangerous for smaller companies because smaller companies may not afford costly certification. Well, it depends on the scheme, but still it is very much in need. Laws, certifications, strategy, and clients, customers should understand it too. You need to have a budget earmarked for security. One thing that I want to refer to, you were speaking about local solutions and insourcing. I believe that Paul mentioned that the internet is based on everything. It has always been an open system. One of the dangers that we are facing is a splinter net, Somebody called it this way. It's not funny. This is the internet of local solutions that have been singled out. In case of cybersecurity, this is not a proper solution. And this question goes to Michał. Well, it's not a question, it's a comment. This is the last word. So, the last thing I want to say, as if in the court proceedings, I referred to French politicians in my presentation. Prime Minister Clemenceau said that the war is too serious to leave it for generals. Cybersecurity is too serious to leave it to one group of people, be it the ICT or security or the legal or compliance department. As a matter of fact, if this is one group responsible, we are nowhere. Cybersecurity, when facing professional threats, requires a vast majority of our companies to reorganize in order to face the music. 2 or 3 states in the world can do it on their own. Other states and other companies require cooperation between technology and services suppliers, including legal, technical, and organizational services suppliers. And at the end of the day, there should be a specific structure on the end user side. One word, we have already developed kind of trust, but this new unveiling of cybersecurity, cloud included. Let's start with organizations. This element is critical for us to go up to a higher level compared to what we have now. Thank you very much. Our time's up. Almost on time. 2 minutes left. This is the time to say thank you for being a part of this discussion. I believe this is one of many discussions that we are going to see this year. I hope that will develop even further. If you're interested, we are going to discuss something that we have pointed out too, standards in cyberspace. I love French politicians just like Michał, so I'll refer to French writers, also science fiction writers. George Herbert Wells said that civilization is a constant race between education and catastrophe. It does not refer to cyber threats only. In some areas, like climate change, have made it possible for us to understand that education is of utmost importance. Cybersecurity still needs repeating and reiterating this. We have not reached this knowledge level so that we feel safe and secure with new technologies that have been changing our lives on a daily basis. Thank you very much.